Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about crime, creepy, and unbelievable stories. So if you're into that, stick around, maybe hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It would really help me out and I would be extremely thankful if you took time to do that. If you guys are also interested, I have a TikTok channel which is blowing up right now and I'm super excited, super thankful to everyone that has joined me over there. Same username at Heebee Jeebeez TV. I will link it in the description box below. I post a couple times a day on there, sometimes even 3 times a day. A lot of interesting stories about crime, creepy, and unbelievable stuff. So definitely check it out. Today I want to spend some time talking about what is really going on in Appalachia. And if you spend time on TikTok, then I'm sure you've seen some of these videos.
If you're in Appalachia, you don't want to look in the trees. Don't look in the trees. It's our safety motto. Then if you hear it, no you don't. If you see it, no you don't. And don't look in the trees.
And the more I see these sorts of videos, the more curious I became. And so I just started doing some research, started digging into the history and the folklore of Appalachia, which I found to be extremely interesting. There are stories from strange lights, there's voices, cryptids, and of course unexplained disappearances, all of which we're going to get into today's video. Now keep in mind, before I go into all of this, a lot of this is still just folklore. We don't have any solid proof of anything, but there are a lot of eyewitnesses and first-person encounters involved that do lend to a lot of credibility when it comes to all of these stories. It's ultimately up to you whether or not you choose to believe. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I've noticed is that a lot of people don't actually seem to know where Appalachia is. So the Appalachian Mountains are actually a stretch of forest and mountains that crosses from Canada and the US, starting in Newfoundland, crossing southwest, going through New York, Pennsylvania, both of the Virginias, Kentucky, Tennessee, both Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. It's also believed to be ancient land and one of the oldest mountain systems on Earth, dating back to 480 million years. Although erosion and just general weather and climate change has taken its toll on the mountains, it's believed that some of these mountain peaks once reached the same height as the Himalayan mountains and possibly even Everest. Now, if you know a little bit about American history, then you know that the Native American tribes were quite spread out throughout America. There were dozens of tribes. In the southern part, especially towards the southern part of Appalachia, one of the more dominant Native American tribes were the Cherokee people. And a lot of their stories are the ones that we talk about today. A lot of their stories are the ones that get passed down through the folklore and the tales that are continuously told to this day. Then came the settlers and the Africans who were looking for freedom. Being isolated in such a dense part of America back then, close to Native Americans who, there was still plenty of tension between all of these groups of people. So this sort of situation ended up bringing a lot of different settler groups together to form somewhat of a tight-knit community, not only to survive, but to, just create bonds with other people. And so in these communities, of course, they would develop things to socialize with. And one of these activities was actually known as play parties. So these play parties were actually not approved by the church. And essentially, it was just a big festive situation, a big festive gathering where people that would play, the banjo players and singers of folk songs, would come together and just have a good time. However, it was during one of these play parties that a very strange incident happened, which gave birth to one of the more famous folklore stories of Appalachia. So in the mid-1800s, there was a very popular fiddler that played at a lot of these play parties, and his name was Martin Stone. He was quite popular, especially when it came to the region of northeastern Tennessee. During the warmer months, he was said to visit one particular area that today is known as Fiddler's Rock, and he was said to have played the fiddle here for hours and hours on end. During one particular day, during the summer months, he was actually out playing on this rock by himself when he noticed that he started gaining an unusual audience. Rattlesnakes were said to have been lured out to where Martin was playing, and they kind of just slithered their way out in front of him, watching him play almost as if they were hypnotized. He would go back to where the people were, he would go back to the communities and tell them about these stories about how the snakes would just come out and watch them, whereas most people would be terrified and would probably run away, if not try to hurt the snake so they wouldn't get bit. Martin was said to have been intrigued and just continued to play to see what else would happen. As he would continue to play for multiple hours on end, the snakes would eventually slither back home after sunset. But during these performances and during the time that he had to himself, Martin came up with a very interesting idea. So you see, snake skin back then was used quite a lot. It was a hot commodity, and people would use it for stuff like belts, and sometimes they would even take the rattle and turn it into a child's toy. So knowing this, Martin realized that he had an opportunity to make some quick money here if he were able to bring back multiple snakes. So he went back to the rock, and this time he actually brought his shotgun with him. And so he continued to play and waited for the snakes to come join him. When he realized that there were enough snakes watching him, instead of continuing to play, he would then use his shotgun and start pinpointing different snakes in order to capture them. He then went on to do this multiple more times, but it was said to have upset the snakes, rightfully so. So one evening, he had returned to Fiddler's Rock, and he started playing, waiting for the snakes to join him. However, the snakes that evening had a very different idea. It wasn't until days later that locals discovered his body right next to his loaded shotgun. So as they started inspecting his body, they realized that he was essentially covered in snake bites. And this just didn't sit well with the locals because they just didn't understand how he had his loaded shotgun right next to him and he wasn't able to use it to defend himself from the snakes. This led many people to speculate that the snakes had finally gotten their revenge on Martin and possibly even have hypnotized him back in order to finally attack him. Since then, locals of the area have named this rock as Fiddler's Rock, and actually many of them refuse to go near it. It's said that during the warmer months, you can hear the faint sounds of Martin's fiddle in the distance, followed by his dying screams over and over again. But of course, that's just one story, and there are many, many more that we can add to the haunting experiences of Appalachia, and a lot of these stories people just simply cannot explain. So to add to these ghostly encounters, there's obviously a lot of history that we can include, especially when it comes to the very tragic time of war and slavery. If you didn't already know, slavery was a very big part of the Southern culture in America. The Southern states were known for having a vast amount of slaves in plantations. So you can only imagine the amount of people that passed away under horrific conditions. Then there's also the Civil War of 1863 that took place in Gettysburg, the Virginias, and of course, Tennessee. It's estimated that approximately 50,000 soldiers and civilians lost their lives during the 3-day battle. And since then, there have been hundreds of sightings of soldiers in these fields. It's become quite a popular area for tourists and history buffs that are looking to have more of a personal experience with the Battle of Gettysburg. And when people do end up going to these fields, they often get a lot more than they bargained for. In these photos, you can see that there are multiple apparitions that people have captured, and for the most part, they all have one thing in common, that they appear to be wearing some sort of soldier uniform. So it leads us to the question as to whether or not these pictures are actually authentic and if people are truly capturing the spirits of all these soldiers. Some even swear that if you listen close enough, you can hear the faint screams of the soldiers in the middle of the night. And honestly, I don't blame them. It's hard to imagine that a place that has experienced so much loss and so much tragedy wouldn't be haunted or wouldn't at least have some sort of energy imprinted onto the land. That then brings us to another battle known as Chickamauga Battle that took place between September 18th to the 20th in 1864. And it's estimated that this battle cost 34,000 people their lives during just 2 days. And from that bloody battle actually comes the story of the green eyes. It's said to be an apparition floating throughout the fields. Although there's no clear-cut shape that is pegged to these glowing eyes, what witnesses all say is that these two eyes are seen floating or kind of gliding throughout the sky. And the story goes is that this is actually the spirit of a soldier that tragically lost his life in a very traumatic way. It's said that this soldier unfortunately lost his life due to a cannonball that ended up hitting him in the face and therefore removing his head. So it's believed that these two glowing eyes are his spirit searching for his lost body. However, others speculate that the green eyes could actually be those of a green-eyed mountain cat that roams the mountains, but others say it goes even further back. Native American folklore will tell you that these eyes are actually a spirit that is some sort of manifestation or a result of a ceremony that was conducted many, many years ago. But while we're on the topic of strange, mysterious lights, that brings us to our next topic, and it's about the brown mountain lights. The earliest documented sightings of these lights actually goes back to 1910 when they were spotted hovering over Brown Mountain in North Carolina. At one point, they were said to appear almost on a nightly basis, almost around the exact same time. But for the most part today, they're said to appear shortly after sunset, and they always have a sort of reddish-brown tint. A practical explanation given by skeptics is that there is a perfectly logical explanation for these lights. People say that it could be just a reflection, others say that it's light pollution, or even possibly swamp gas. But Appalachian folklore has something very different to say. The Cherokee, who were dominant in the area, say that these lights are actually spirits, and it all comes from a very bloody battle that happened between the Cherokee and the Catawba Indians, which resulted in a lot of loss of life. These lights are actually said to be the wives of all the men who lost their lives during that battle, looking for their long-lost husbands. So that brings us to the question of what these lights could possibly be. Are they truly the spirits of the dead? Are they UFOs, or is there just a very simple, logical, and practical explanation for them? Then there's the viral phrase going around on TikTok that warns people to not look in the trees. But why? Comments of these videos are actually flooded about people wondering why you shouldn't look into the trees, what's out there. Some people just don't understand what these creators are talking about. So I decided to dig a little bit deeper and find out why we should just not look into the trees. Amongst those local to Appalachia, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them swear that there's something living in the forest, but no one seems to know exactly what it is. There seems to be a few cryptids that people associate these things to, and we'll go into that a little bit further here. A general description of what seems to be in the forest is a figure that appears to be transparent or somewhat translucid. It's said to camouflage, and of course it's said to live in the trees and just kind of hangs out there and watches its surroundings. And the reason you don't want to look into the trees is because once it realizes that you've spotted it, that's when you're in trouble. And some people have even gone as far to say that this creature actually resembles the Predator from that movie. And I'll put a picture here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Now, this also brings me to another point about the missing 411 phenomenon that's been going quite viral over the past few years, with an extremely high amount of people going missing in national parks, especially within the Appalachian region. But we'll circle back to that a little bit later. So like I was saying earlier, these cryptids are said to swing from tree to tree, and you won't necessarily see it, but you'll definitely see the trees moving in an abnormal pattern in a much stronger way than, wind or a breeze would cause. It makes you wonder if there's actually something there swinging from tree to tree. Then once the sun sets, you'll start to hear these screams that no one can fully explain or even connect to any particular animal. Because of all this, paranoia has definitely taken its toll amongst many of the people living in Appalachia, and it's grown in so much popularity that people have actually developed a set of rules that you should follow whenever you're in the Appalachian region. And these are the 10 rules that I was able to come across. Number 1, if you hear something call out your name in the woods, no, you didn't. 2, don't look in the trees. You can look at them, but don't look in them. 3, if you see something you shouldn't have seen, don't run, just walk. 4, if you hear odd noises close to you, they're actually far, but the opposite is also true. If it sounds far, it's right behind you. 5, close your windows, blinds, and lock your doors by sunset. 6, if anything knocks at your door or windows at night, no, it didn't. 7, if you get home late, get from your car to your door as quickly as you can. Number 8, don't go out into the woods alone, ever. 9, trust your pets, especially when you're going on walks with them. And number 10, don't wear red in the woods. So this begs the question of what is actually out there if the locals are so terrified of the forest that they have to come up with these odd rules that many of us would never think twice about following. So throughout my research and through a lot of digging, watching a lot of videos, I was able to come up with 3 common cryptids that people really seem to believe in and actually think have a lot of credibility, have a lot of eyewitnesses, and, just seem to be the common answer to what is hiding out there. So let's start with cryptid number 1, known as the devil monkey. And I know it sounds completely ridiculous, but just hear me out on this one. They're presumed to be some sort of hidden population of ancient primate living in the Appalachian Mountains. The first encounter with these so-called devil monkeys actually goes back to 1934 in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen an unknown creature that could leap across fields at lightning speed, sometimes even up to 20 feet at a time. And then came the first official sighting of the devil monkey in 1959 by a couple with the last name Boyd. They were said to have been driving down an isolated road in Saltville, Virginia, while they were going home. All of a sudden, something just leaps onto their car, onto the roof, and starts attacking it. It was said to have left 3 very big visible scratch marks. Their young daughter was also in the back seat, and as terrified as she was throughout the whole experience, she was able to get a good look at it. And after the couple had gotten back to safety, the daughter told them what she saw. She said that the creature had light taffy-colored hair, and it also stood on 2 large back legs while having 2 short front legs. Several days later, in the same town, 2 nurses reported a similar incident. While they were driving back from work one morning, a creature suddenly jumped onto their car and again ripped open the rooftop of their convertible. Luckily, both of the women were able to get away safely. Based on other stories of the devil monkeys, a lot of people say that this creature stands anywhere between 5 to 8 feet tall and is quite aggressive. Unlike other cryptids, there isn't any solid evidence out there. There's no videos. I haven't seen any photos of this particular cryptid to prove anything. Whereas something like Bigfoot, there are thousands of videos and photos of Bigfoot out there that make you think twice about whether or not it could possibly be real. So cryptid number 2. This one is known as Dogman, and it's absolutely horrifying. I would be absolutely terrified if I ever came across this particular cryptid. And essentially, it's basically a werewolf that lives in Appalachia, except people call it the Dogman. But before I tell you about the Dogman, check out this video on TikTok of what some people believe to be a Dogman just staring someone down right outside their house. So take a look and let me know what you guys think. So while the originating stories of Dogman actually started in Michigan, it's actually known as the Michigan Dogman over there, it's worked its way down to Appalachia. And it's described as being a half man, half wolf creature standing anywhere between 6 to 8 feet tall, covered in very thick, matted black or gray fur. Most people claim that this creature resembles something like a hellhound and almost always has glowing red eyes. The people of Appalachia claim to see this cryptid always lurking in the dark, and sometimes it's known to chase people down, whether they're on foot or in the cars, and this is one of the reasons why they tell you don't look into the trees. It's said to hide in there, especially at night. So if it catches you looking at it, you might be in trouble. So we come to our third cryptid, and this one is probably the most terrifying. And I feel like this one probably has more truth to it because it is a tale of the Native Americans. And for some reason, I just have this feeling that a lot of their stories are based in truth. They've been around for so long, they have to know stuff that we just don't fully understand. So this particular cryptid is known as the Wendigo. And the Native American tribes are actually said to be so terrified of this creature that they actually refuse to say its name out loud because it could potentially attract it to them. Now, if you don't know what a Wendigo is, it's said to be one of the most terrifying cryptids out there to mankind, not just because of what it can do to you, but because of what it looks like. So it appears in multiple forms, taking the shape of humans and animals. It's known to shapeshift, but its truest form appears as an emaciated skeleton with glowing yellow eyes. It's also said to have its skin hanging from its bones. It has a gray ashy complexion and it has very deep dark holes for eyes. But instead of having a typical head, it's actually said to have a deer skeleton as a head with antlers. But if that wasn't terrifying enough, it's also said to reek of decomposition. So like I was saying earlier, the origin of the Wendigo actually goes back to the Algonquin natives, who describe it as being an evil spirit with a heart of ice. And according to legend, a Wendigo is born when a human turns to cannibalism to survive. During the time of incoming settlers, there were a lot of tough times with people fighting for land, fighting each other, fighting to survive, which resulted in humans doing the unthinkable. And these creatures are actually said to mimic voices in order to lure their prey out to them. And there have been countless of encounters of people claiming to have heard their name being called in the woods. And for this exact reason, when the Appalachians tell you that if you heard your name being called out into the woods, no, you did not. And as a special mention, we can't talk about the Appalachian Mountains or any forest for that matter without talking about Bigfoot, a cryptid that needs absolutely no introduction. Almost everyone on this planet has heard about Bigfoot. So Bigfoot is known as this giant primate cryptid, and it's said to live in the deep forest across North America, but multiple other countries have their own version of Bigfoot. For example, the Yeti lives in Russia and Siberia, essentially the same thing as Bigfoot, but it's said to have white fur instead of brown reddish fur. Sightings of Bigfoot actually stem back hundreds of years, but as technology has improved, we've been seeing more and more evidence come forward of Bigfoot. Lately on TikTok, I've seen a new video of a drone actually, and I'll link it here for you guys to watch. So let me know what you guys think, if this video is authentic or if you know whether or not it's been debunked, let me know. Now, when it comes to Bigfoot, there's one particular point that does raise alarm bells, and it's this map here. It's a correlation between Bigfoot sightings, the cave systems across North America, and the amount of people that have gone missing across national parks. All three overlap each other almost perfectly, which is quite creepy. And as you can see, a huge chunk of these all line up across Appalachia. So is this a coincidence or is there more to it? This then brings me to my next point of missing 411 that I actually touched on a little bit earlier. So if you're new to the space of unsolved mysteries, then you might not know what missing 411 is. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a summary. So essentially, it's a theory created by this man here, David Paulides, and he's a former police officer who now investigates the alarming amount of missing people vanishing in the national parks across America and Canada. He's even written multiple books on this, documenting cases that fit his criteria, and he's also made 3 very interesting documentaries about this topic. 2 of them are actually available on Amazon Prime. It's called Missing 411 and Missing 411 The Hunted. And he actually just released a 3rd one in December called Missing 411, The UFO Connection, which I have not seen yet, but from what I've heard, it is very, very good. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely take a look. But my point is that these documentaries are actually very interesting to watch, and they make you wonder about what could possibly be out there and what is taking all of these people. It's an alarming amount of people that go missing every year. And what's harder to accept and swallow is that there's almost no trace of these people ever found. Now, although David Paulides doesn't really push any sort of theory onto the viewer, he does present all of the facts from all of the first-person encounters and kind of just lets the viewer decide for themselves what's going on. So it could literally be a variety of things. Some people tend to believe that it is Bigfoot. Other people think that it could potentially be UFOs coming down and abducting people when they're isolated in the woods. Others seem to think that there's a much more practical explanation for this, that people simply just get lost and unfortunately succumb to the elements of the outdoors. But my kind of thoughts and my questions surround this map. And when I saw that map for the first time, it kind of just gave me the chills. Because what would be the chances that all 3 of these things would overlap each other so perfectly? Bigfoot sightings, cave systems, and a map of all of these missing people. So of course, like I was saying, a lot of people would brush this off as simply being someone getting lost in the dense forests, or maybe even falling victim to animal attacks. However, when it comes to David Paulides, he has thought about all this, and he's actually developed a very strict rules or criteria that he looks at and compares to any missing persons case in order to make sure whether or not this fits the missing 411 phenomenon or if it could actually be explained through a different means. So what are his criteria? Well, this is what I was able to put together. People seemingly vanishing into thin air, no trace of animal attack, rescue dogs are unable to pick up a scent. This is usually the main criteria and one of the biggest ones that he looks for. There's also if a person was found deceased or alive, they're usually found a significant distance from where they were last seen, usually a distance that would be basically impossible for them to travel alone by foot and without any resources. A famous example of a story that fits his criteria is actually the story of Stephen Kubacki. And a lot of you might have already heard about this story, especially if you know about Missing 411. But essentially, he was a college student who went missing in 1978, and he had actually gone on a solo ski trip on Lake Michigan. After he didn't come home and his friends and family didn't hear from him, he was reported missing. And so when police went to go look for him, all they found were his ski poles, a backpack, and his footsteps in the snow that seemingly kind of just vanished once they reached the edge of the lake. So initially, police thought that Stephen must have fallen through the ice and unfortunately ended up drowning, but they couldn't prove this because they didn't have a body and there was no crack in the ice. Being stumped, they didn't really know what else to do. But it wasn't until 15 months later that Stephen actually resurfaced 40 miles away from his father's home in the middle of a meadow with absolutely zero recollection of what had happened to him. The only thing they were able to piece together was that he had a map on him that actually showed he had somehow done a tour of America And he also had a t-shirt that didn't belong to him. To this day, we have no idea what actually happened to Stephen. He only did one short interview shortly after he was found where he said that he had no recollection of what happened to him. But since then, he's basically refused to speak to media about what happened to him. Of course, there's many theories out there. Some people say that he kind of wanted to get out. He wanted freedom, so he went on a trip by himself. And then when he came back, he came up with this crazy story to explain to everyone about his disappearance. But other people seem to think that there's much more to it and that something very odd could have possibly happened to him. But to tie all of this together with Appalachia and Missing 411, in his documentary, Missing 411 The Hunted, David Paulides actually speaks a woman that claims to have seen something in the trees while she was out hunting by herself. And the shocking part is that she said that this particular thing was translucent. It would move from tree to tree, similar to the devil monkey that we were talking about earlier. And when it noticed that she had spotted it, it just froze, almost as if it were trying to camouflage into the rest of the environment. She did try to take a photo of it, but her camera ended up malfunctioning. But for the full story, I really suggest you guys watch the documentary to get the full picture and the full understanding. So this brings me towards the end of the video, and what could possibly be this translucid cryptid that's out there? Is this what's responsible for all of the missing people? Could this be one of the cryptids we talked about? Or is there something much more nefarious going on? If you just go on YouTube and do a few quick searches, you'll hear and you'll see countless of stories coming from park rangers, campers, hikers, even just passerbyers that swear on their lives they've seen something extremely unusual and even terrifying in the woods of Appalachia. But the question always remains, what is out there? I could make an extremely long video on the countless of cryptids and folklore tales out there in the Appalachian Mountains because we haven't even fully covered the main ones out there. For example, there's still dozens of UFO sightings out there. There's the Mothman, there's the story of the Bell Witch, and so much more. So if you guys want a part 2 of this video, let me know. Just leave a comment down below. But also let me know what you guys think about what is hiding out there in Appalachia. There's so much area in the world that we haven't discovered. You know, it's a well-known fact that we haven't discovered more than 5% of the ocean. And the same thing kind of applies to the forest. There's so much area that becomes so dense that it's just not fully possible or even safe to go out and venture into. I honestly would not be fully surprised if we were able to discover some sort of unknown creature that's been living out there. You know, if humans were able to live under very rough conditions once upon a time, all those years ago, it's definitely not impossible to believe that there's some sort of other version of us out there that still hasn't fully developed and has been, you know, unexposed to the rest of society. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. That's going to do it for today's video. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. And if you guys are interested in my TikTok, I have a lot more content on there. The link is down below. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.